and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Moon Jae-in in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. President Moon Jae-in has laid out some ambitious plans to breathe new life into the job market and rein in household debt. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. With more people here in Korea jumping into the startup scene, we take a look at what needs to be done to help the country's entrepreneurs. These stories and more coming right up. But first, the Korean stock market had a mixed day today, with the Kospi and Kosdaq moving in opposite directions. The Kospi opened up 0.7%, climbing above the 2,300 mark, extending its stellar performance on the back of robust first-quarter earnings reports from local companies and improved profitability. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi rose to 2,295.33, up 0.2%. The Kosdaq fell to 639.11, 0.97% down. Meanwhile, the Korean won strengthened against the greenback to 1,116. Lotte Mart has reactivated its website in China after roughly 2 months offline. Its parent company, Lotte Group, has been at the center of China's economic retaliation since Seoul's decision to deploy the U.S. missile defense system THAAD on Korean soil. However, with recent efforts to repair ties between Seoul and Beijing under the new Moon Jae-in administration, it's thought that China is going a little easier on Lotte. That said, Lotte Mart branches remain shut over what Chinese authorities say are breaches of safety regulations. Lotte has some 120 retail outlets in China, including 5 department stores. Analysts say that if the stores remain closed for another 3 months, Lotte will suffer lost revenue totaling some $265 million. Korean spending overseas during the long weekend at the beginning of the month grew faster than spending here at home as an increasing number of people chose to travel outside of the country. Data by KB Kookmin Card shows overseas card spending from April 29th to May 9th was up almost 65% from the same period last year. The figure for domestic transactions rose 12.6%. More Koreans chose to spend their so-called golden holiday in other countries, with Japan, the United States, and Vietnam proving to be popular destinations. Meanwhile, card spending by Koreans in China fell over the period, as fewer people chose to travel to the country amid Beijing's retaliatory measures against Korea's deployment of the THAAD missile defense system. There's a new report that points out redistributing income can help improve economic growth. It suggests that evening out income differences could help trigger a virtuous cycle that in the end would induce growth. Our Eunice Kim has more.
Economic growth or closing the income gap. This is often presented as an either-or choice. And as the debate on how to get the economy roaring again continues, Korean think tank Hyundai Research Institute offers this possibility, that the two can go hand in hand. In its recent report that analyzed 43 countries' economies, including those in and outside of the OECD, the institute concludes for every 1 point improvement in income redistribution, it would lead to a 0.1 percentage point jump up in economic growth. As far as factors that would have an effect on growth, improvement in human capital showed the biggest boost at 0.18 percentage point for every 1% bump up. An equivalent investment in physical capital showed a 0.12 percentage point gain, while gains in income redistribution resulted in a 0.1 percentage point rise. So while income redistribution can't be seen as the major growth driver, the report said it can be seen as a contributor, especially when fused with improvements in human and physical capital investment. The problem is that Korea's income inequality has been worsening. The country's income redistribution index in the 9 years from 2000 through 2009 was at 2.32 points. That dropped to 2.28 between 2010 and 2015. Compared to the sample of 43 countries, while Korea's economic growth in the two terms had improved, its gap in income redistribution had exacerbated. The report said policy should be drafted to allow for fairer distribution to offset the negative side effects of economic growth, while setting the economy on a stronger footing with reasonable regulations, quality jobs growth, and improved income equality for households. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Now, President Moon Jae-in seems ready to pull out all the stops in order to create more jobs and improve conditions for workers nationwide. But with growing expectations for these new policies, there are also concerns over how effective his plans will be. Let's take a closer look.
Opening an era of zero irregular jobs in the public sector. That was a promise made by President Moon Jae-in last week when he met with irregular workers at Incheon International Airport. The president believes irregular jobs lead to inequality and polarization that end up stunting economic growth. And in addition to tackling the problem of irregular workers, Moon has also pledged to create 810,000 new jobs. He says he'll do this by hiring more civil servants, switching irregular jobs in the public sector to regular jobs, while also reducing working hours. The finance ministry is also said to be considering a supplementary budget aimed at creating quality jobs. But despite such promises, there are also some voices of concern, especially among businesses. They're worried that the rift between workers and employers could grow, and that there are limits as to how far reforms can go when considering the relationship between conglomerates and smaller businesses. On top of this, the new government plans to introduce a cap on household debt to prevent it from rising further. Amid hopes and concerns, a lot of attention will be on how these plans are implemented and what effects they'll have on the economy.
And to tell us more about this, Professor Yang Jun-suk from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Happy to be here.
All right, so let's first talk about President Moon's stance on jobs. I mean, labor unions are welcoming his plans to create more jobs in the public sector and also address the large number of irregular workers. But how effective do you think these plans will be in boosting Korea's employment?
Okay, well, President Moon made a lot of promises, but if we look at just this particular promise of placing irregular workers into regular worker category, I'm not sure if it'll do any good in terms of numbers of jobs created. It'll improve perhaps the quality of the jobs available, but not necessarily the numbers. Now, about 50% of Korean labor force seems to be classified as irregular workers, whether it be dispatched, temporary, or temporary contract workers. Now, one of the reasons why the irregular workers have become so popular is that if you become a regular worker, then there's a lot of additional cost. For example, there's 4 major insurance: unemployment, pension, workers' compensation, the health insurance.
Okay.
Those are a major expenditure on the part of the company, and also they have to set aside severance pay for these workers in case they quit. So a lot of companies are using dispatched workers, irregular workers, because they can avoid that. They can pass those costs altogether, or use the outsourcing firm to pay for that. And in cases where they cannot get irregular workers, what they do is they use the workers that they already have and give them the work. So a lot of the regular workers become overworked. Now, if we change this into regular jobs, then, well, President Moon has first promised that he will change the government irregular workers into regular workers. And that's about 17% of the government labor force.
Okay.
And again, you'll have to pay the insurance, you have to pay the severance pay, and it's not quite clear whether the government has enough funds. He has promised that he'll have 1 trillion won supplementary budget, and a lot of money is going to come from there, but whether it'll be enough to switch the workers into regular category and also provide other jobs promises that he made is questionable. And then for the private sector, A lot of companies, especially small, medium-sized enterprises, they cannot afford to pay these fixed costs of new labor. That's why they're hiring the irregular workers. So they're going to need some kind of support. And it's also questionable whether there will be enough support to manage to do that.
Now, there are also some voices of concerns coming from businesses that are saying that these plans will eventually lead to tax increases and other problems. Tell us more about this.
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, a lot of companies, especially small and medium-sized companies, do not have the funds to switch these workers from irregular workers to regular workers, as well as all the other promises that President Moon has made. So in order to get those funds, it's probably very likely that there'll have to be tax increase somewhere down the road. Now, what President Moon, I think, is hoping is that this changing the workers into irregular workers will make them more secure about their jobs, their future. They'll start consume more, and you'll have an economic growth and more tax receipt for the government, so tax increase should not be that large. I think that's what he's hoping for. But whether we'll get there is very questionable right now. Luckily, export sector is picking up, but domestic consumption factor, while it's looking more optimistic than before, it's still not doing very well. So we'll have to see whether these policies spark more consumption and more growth.
Now, the finance ministry has also said that it's considering rolling out a supplementary budget for job creation. And of course, opposition parties have been opposing this plan. So what are your thoughts on the supplementary budget and how it may help to boost employment?
Okay, right now, President Moon has promised a supplementary budget of 10 trillion won. And as I mentioned before, a lot of that is going to go into job creation. There's question over whether it'll be enough or not. But if you look at just the 10 trillion won supplementary budget, I think Korea can handle it. I've argued here before that we need a supplementary budget.
Right.
I'm not quite sure whether creating more government jobs is the best way to spend that supplementary budget. But last year we had an 11 trillion won supplementary budget. 2015, I believe, we had 13 trillion won budget. Last year's supplementary budget, we did it without increasing the government deficit or debt because the government planned for a budget surplus and tax receipts were higher than first thought. So I don't think the 10 trillion won budget will be a drain on Korean economy. But I think we should go over very carefully on President Moon's campaign promises to see what's workable, what may not be workable, and try to spend this money in the most efficient way possible.
All right, then what are President Moon's plans on tackling Korea's massive household debt?
Okay, well, I think his main line of attack is to limit the household debt to 150% of disposable income, for disposable personal income. And I think that's actually a very good way of trying to handle it. And in order to do that, he's lowering the ceiling on interest from the current 27.3% to 20%. And he's going to use the not only the existing LTV and DTI regulations, but also DSR, debt service ratio regulations, to try to limit more household debt going to the people who may not be able to pay. And then he's also considering trying to limit the increases in monthly rent for housing or jeonse. That might not be possible. One of the reasons that we're having so much increase in jeonse right now is just because the interest rates are so low. And I'm afraid that if he tries to limit the increases in jeonse, you'll have less jeonse for the people to fall back on.
Right.
But still, I think he's trying to make a headway on this. Right now, the household debt is slightly over 150%. So 150% seems achievable if we just have a little more growth than we did last year.
Okay. Well, in your opinion, what would be some ways to minimize some negative effects that could come from all these plans, and also while he tackles this household debt problem effectively?
Okay. Well, he said that he'll forgive the long-run household debt, where the lender or borrower has no capacity to repay and hasn't repaid for quite a while. I think that's actually a good move because a lot of these people who have taken household debt for just living, their living necessities, they really cannot repay the debt. So forgiving their debt may actually allow them to get better jobs and get themselves out of the hole. I'm not concerned too much about the people who have taken household loans but are on the rich side because they've actually taken loans to buy housing. If you remember last year, there were a fear that they would tighten up these regulations so that you will not be able to get loans. And then also they announced that perhaps they'll limit supply in housing. I think that's what drove a very large increase in household debt last year. So for people who are fairly rich, they can handle it. What I'm a bit afraid of is people in the middle. People who have taken the loans, but now they, because of the new regulations, they cannot roll over the debt. They'll have to give up their houses or they'll have to radically cut down their consumption. I think something has to be done for those people in the middle. Perhaps give them an easier opportunity to roll over their debt or give them a longer payout period so that they can they don't have to cut back on consumption so much or lose their house. But I think it's those people in the middle who are being a bit ignored right now.
Right. All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
With the world pressuring North Korea to end its provocations, the regime's trade with the European Union shrank significantly last year. According to the Korea Trade Investment and Promotion Agency, trade between North Korea and EU member states dropped last year by 14% on year to just over 28 million euros. The EU's exports to the regime rose by 8%, but its imports from North Korea fell by more than half to a total of 6.2 million euros. The decline in what little trade North Korea has left with Europe is attributed to stronger sanctions against Pyongyang. The EU began imposing its own unilateral sanctions on Pyongyang last May. Since late last week, malicious software has been taking computers hostage in an unprecedented worldwide outbreak, locking people out of their data and demanding hundreds of dollars to let them back in. And our Yoon Shin tells us that some experts claim to have found evidence linking the ransomware to North Korea.
Researchers are looking into alleged ties between North Korea and the ransomware dubbed WannaCry that's infected more than 300,000 computers in 150 countries since Friday. The US-based software company Symantec and Kaspersky Lab based in Russia said that some code in an earlier version of the virus had also been found in programs used by the Lazarus Group, a hacking operation said by many experts to be run by North Korea.
Whenever a high-profile attack or breach breaks out, we basically dig into it and look to see if we can find indicators that match known groups that we're tracking. And right now, we've uncovered a couple of what we would call weak indicators or weak links between WannaCry and this group that's been previously known as Lazarus.
Both firms added that it was too early to say the regime was behind the cyber attack. But investigators in the affected countries are working to track down the culprits. The ransomware has disrupted operations at institutions and businesses across the globe, including car factories, hospitals, and transportation systems, by locking people out of their computers and threatening to delete all their data unless they hand over several $100s. The spread of the virus has slowed down since Monday. However, cybersecurity researchers warn of a fresh wave of attacks. Some 300 variants of the malicious software have been reported so far. They mostly infect older versions of Microsoft software that has not been recently updated. While some Korean companies and individuals have been reportedly affected, the government has said its computers have not. The authorities advise people not to pay the ransom if the virus appears on their computer, because the program will then double the price and won't restore the data anyway. They ask that people direct any reports or inquiries to the Korea Internet and Security Agency. Lee Eun-shin, Business Daily.
In a country where 70% of graduates have difficulty landing a job in their first year out of college, startups are being more recognized as another way to success. And with the new administration also looking to invigorate Korea's startup scene, our Lee Ju-young explains what efforts are being made to nurture promising entrepreneurs.
In a country where the top 10 chaebol, or family-run conglomerates, take up roughly 80% of the economy, Korea's tech startups are emerging as a new force to be reckoned with. According to Hyundai Research Institute, the number of startups has been on the rise from about 8,800 back in the year 2000 to over 31,000 in 2015. Total sales have also increased from around $157 billion back in 2000 to $191 billion in 2014. And as the country faces a greater need for new growth engines, startups are expected to take on an ever more critical role in the economy.
I think the biggest reason will be job creation, with machines replacing human labor as technology develops around the world. Existing firms may grow more in size, but that doesn't necessarily translate into new jobs. It's the startups that are creating more jobs. Also, as we inch toward the fourth industrial revolution, imagination will be key. We need to be able to fuse existing technologies with creativity, but that's hard for big companies to do. Startups will need to play that role, and only then will Korea have a future.
One startup experiencing fast growth is My Real Plan, located in Pangyo Techno Valley, the heart of Korea's tech startup scene. This father-son company, which launched 2 years ago, is a marketplace that brings insurance agents and customers under a unified platform. When customers request an insurance plan, it goes through an analysis system that identifies the best proposal, helping users understand what they're buying into, while broadening the customer base for insurance agents. The tech firm says it's come a long way from its humble beginnings.
The very first funding was very difficult. If I look back, the odds were against us, and I had to raise funding from a very difficult place. But I'm certainly thankful that it went through, and we were able to, use that initial funding to really, make an impact. To start to make an impact. I shot a Facebook message to a venture capitalist. And he's like, why don't you come along? Why don't you come into my office in 2 days? And I was like, okay. And I gave him my pitch. And in 5-6 minutes into the pitch, he basically said, let's do it. Until that moment, I had already talked to maybe 20 VCs.
Experts say apart from the initial funding, another obstacle that deters people from jumping into the startup scene is a perception that one failure can lead to near impossible recovery. This is one of the reasons why the government created a support program for college startups back in 2011 with the goal of empowering universities as a cradle of new business beginnings. Out of the 40 schools designated around the nation, Dongguk University has been in the lead for 7 years in a row now. Behind this is its ability to incubate innovative startups like Dalda, which uses drones to collect big data. The fledgling company was founded by 4 computer science majors from the school. After going through a selection process last year, it was able to earn a free office space and monthly financial support of about $4,500, which acted as a launchpad to commercialize this chip.
이 칩만 장착시켜 주시면은 한국에서 미국에 있는 드론을 조종하실 수도 있고 전 세계 어디서든 드론을 조종하실 수도 있습니다.
Once installed, users can remotely fly their drones, collecting up to 72 pieces of information simultaneously, including sound, images, and particulate matter concentration levels. Dalda says of all the aid it has received so far, including state assistance, support from the university has by far been the best.
They give us a lot of attention, who we are and what we do. They constantly check in with us, and when we tell them what we need, they help us. So they pay closer attention to details. For startups, money is important, but having mentors can be even more important. When I ask for help elsewhere, the people that are involved are civil servants, so they don't have much business experience. But the professors here all have experience in startups, and they have good connections as well. That helps us a lot.
It's this kind of support that has helped these startups rack up a total of about $5.6 million in sales last year alone, while creating 115 new jobs. Even after graduation, students have access to further guidance.
I think students should have a lot of opportunities and go through their own failures within the university boundaries. That's why I think entrepreneurship education is a must at the college level. I really hope we can create a startup culture at our school. I hope that all our students have an open mind, are open to challenges, and have the required knowledge as well. My goal is to foster creative talent that society needs.
Experts also add that while the government has been in charge of startup support policies until now, the private sector needs to take a more active role in leading large-scale investments to create more quality jobs in a healthy startup ecosystem. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that does it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.